Hey friends, tonight we're diving into one of the most fascinating and brutal tales in history, the rise of the Mongol Empire. Imagine a vast, windswept steppe stretching as far as the eye can see, the air sharp with the chill of Mongolia's unforgiving winters. Now, picture a young boy named Temujin, born into a broken and divided world, one that would soon fall under the shadow of his growing ambition. But here's the catch. He wasn't born a ruler. He wasn't destined to conquer the world. He was born into struggle, cast out of his own tribe, with nothing more than a burning desire to unite fractured tribes and forge something that had never been seen before. It's a story that, on the surface, seems improbable. Who could have imagined that this lone boy, enduring poverty, exile, and betrayal, would rise to command the largest contiguous empire the world has ever known? You probably won't survive this journey unscathed. Genghis Khan's rise isn't a fairy tale. It's messy, it's ruthless, and it will pull you into a whirlwind of blood and grit. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'm curious to know where you're listening from, so feel free to drop your location and local time in the comments. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Temujin's story begins in the late 12th century. Born around 1162, he was a member of the Mongol tribe called the Borgigin, a tribe with a long history, but one that was far from dominant at the time. His early life was far from luxurious. In fact, it was downright difficult. At a young age, Temujin's father, Yasuge, a respected leader, was poisoned by a rival tribe, leaving his family vulnerable and isolated. Shortly after, Temujin's own tribe turned against his family, leaving them to fend for themselves on the unforgiving Mongolian steppes. Picture a young boy, barely out of childhood, struggling to survive with his mother and siblings. They were cast out, forced to scavenge and fight for their survival in a harsh and unforgiving landscape. And yet, something burned inside Temujin. He wasn't content to accept his fate. Historians still argue whether Temujin's early hardships were the defining moments of his leadership, or if he was simply born with an innate charisma that set him apart from other leaders. Either way, his journey toward greatness began with a single, important decision. He would not let his people fall into the shadows of their past. As a teenager, Temujin made an audacious move that would change everything. He broke with traditional tribal laws and sought to unite not just his own tribe, but all of the Mongol tribes. In a society where loyalty to one's tribe and family was paramount, this was a revolutionary idea. Temujin's rise to power was based on something far beyond familial loyalty. It was rooted in the idea of merit. He began to recruit followers from outside his own bloodline, offering them a place in his new vision of the Mongol world, regardless of their background or tribe. Temujin saw that the Mongols were too divided to achieve their full potential, and he set out to create a force that could unite them. He was a skilled strategist, using a combination of alliances, promises, and sheer force to rally support. Unlike other tribal leaders, Temujin didn't just rely on brute force. He understood the value of unity and loyalty. The Mongol tribes were often at war with each other, fighting over territory, resources, and prestige. But Temujin offered them something new: stability, structure, and, above all, the promise of a united future. But even with all of this, the road to power was not easy. In the early years of his campaign, he faced countless betrayals, even from those closest to him. There were moments where it seemed as if he would fail. Yet, somehow, Temujin's willpower was stronger than ever. His determination would eventually win over even his harshest enemies, paving the way for the eventual rise of Genghis Khan. Historians debate whether Genghis Khan's early leadership was the result of sheer willpower, or if he simply possessed a deep understanding of the people he sought to rule. Regardless, by 1206, Temujin had solidified his position as the supreme ruler of the Mongol people. He was given the title of Genghis Khan, meaning universal ruler. But this wasn't just a title, it was a declaration of his intent to conquer the known world. Under his leadership, the Mongol Empire would expand rapidly, beginning with the conquest of neighboring tribes and eventually moving into Central Asia, the Middle East, and beyond. To understand how Genghis Khan was able to accomplish this, you need to grasp the Mongol army's incredible organization and discipline. The Mongol army wasn't just a group of warriors, it was a machine, meticulously organized and engineered. For success, every soldier had a role, and the army was broken into units called tumans, which were made up of 10,000 soldiers. The tumans were further broken down into smaller units, allowing for unparalleled flexibility and speed. And, speaking of speed, Genghis Khan's cavalry was legendary. They could move at incredible speeds, striking with precision and vanishing before their enemies even knew what hit them. But it wasn't just speed that made the Mongols so formidable, it was their tactics. Genghis Khan was a master of psychological warfare, using deception and surprise to unsettle his enemies. He would feign retreat, only to lure his opponents into a trap. The Mongols also employed siege warfare techniques, learned from their encounters with the Chinese and other civilizations. They were experts at building and using siege engines, making them a threat even to fortified cities. And then came one of Genghis Khan's most famous and devastating campaigns, the invasion of the Khwarezmian Empire. This was an empire located in what is now modern-day Iran, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, and Kazakhstan, and it was one of the most powerful in the region at the time. The Khwarezmians initially welcomed Mongol ambassadors, but when one of these envoys was killed, Genghis Khan responded with brutal force. He sent an army into the heart of the Khwarezmian Empire, and the results were catastrophic. Cities were razed, populations massacred, and the Khwarezmian Empire was effectively destroyed. Historians still argue over the motivations behind Genghis Khan's ruthlessness. Was it pure revenge, or was it a calculated decision to send a message to other empires? Either way, the destruction of Khwarezm sent shockwaves throughout the world. The Mongols' success wasn't just about brute force, though. It was also about strategy, diplomacy, and an understanding of how to deal with people. Genghis Khan was not just a conqueror. He was a statesman. He valued the expertise of those he conquered, and many of his most trusted generals and advisors were from the very civilizations he had defeated. He understood that in order to maintain control over such a vast and diverse empire, he needed to foster cooperation and loyalty. This was a lesson he learned. Well, Genghis Khan's empire was not just a military powerhouse. It was also a model of governance, trade, and cultural exchange. Historians debate the long-term effects of Mongol rule on global trade and culture, but there's no denying that the Mongols played a pivotal role in reopening the Silk Road and facilitating the exchange of ideas, goods, and technologies between the East and West. As Genghis Khan's empire grew, so did the scope of his ambitions. His military genius was not just in the battlefield, but also in his uncanny ability to foresee the future of his empire. The creation of his vast Mongol network wasn't solely about violence and conquest. It was also about control, trade, and infrastructure. When we think of the Mongols, it's easy to focus solely on their brutality, their war cries, and their endless battles, but Genghis Khan's empire was far more than that. You see, Genghis Khan understood that the key to controlling a vast empire wasn't just about conquering lands, but also about how to govern those lands after they were subdued. Historians still argue whether Genghis Khan's rule was a continuation of the traditional Mongol way of governance, or if he truly transformed the structure of empire building altogether. Regardless, the Mongol Empire was built upon an unprecedented level of organization. The Mongols employed an extensive intelligence network. Their spies, who were often disguised as traders, traveled far and wide, gathering crucial information about enemy territories, vulnerabilities, and political instability. In a way, Genghis Khan's empire was one of the earliest models of global surveillance, long before modern intelligence agencies even existed. These spies were able to communicate with the speed of light, at least by the standards of the day, through an incredibly efficient postal system that stretched across the entire empire. This system, known as the Yam, was a chain of relay stations where messengers could quickly pass on letters and information, allowing Genghis Khan to maintain control over his far-flung empire, even as it expanded. But even with such systems in place, the Mongol conquests weren't all smooth sailing. They faced constant challenges as they moved deeper into the Middle East and beyond. One of the most difficult and famous of these challenges was the siege of Baghdad in 1258. Nearly 50 years after Genghis Khan's death, the siege of Baghdad was a devastating event in world history, marking the fall of one of the most prominent centers of knowledge and power in the Islamic world. Baghdad at the time was the capital of the Abbasid Caliphate, an empire that had existed for centuries. Under the leadership of Caliph al-Mustasim, Baghdad was a prosperous, intellectual hub. But despite the city's grandeur, it wasn't immune to the Mongol onslaught. The city's defenses were no match for the Mongols' sophisticated siege tactics. The Mongols, being masters of warfare, employed their advanced siege engines like catapults, trebuchets, and battering rams to breach Baghdad's formidable walls. When they finally broke through, the consequences were horrifying. The Mongols sacked the city, plundering libraries, killing thousands, and even drowning the city's grand intellectual legacy. The House of Wisdom, the largest library in the Islamic world at the time, was destroyed, and many priceless manuscripts were lost forever. Historians still debate the reasons for the Mongol siege. Was it a matter of revenge after the Caliph's refusal to submit? Or was it simply the Mongols' ruthless military strategy at work? Some argue that it was inevitably after all. The Mongols were never known for their mercy, but for their drive to expand, to crush resistance, and to assert their dominance. One thing is certain, though: the fall of Baghdad sent shockwaves across the Middle East, with repercussions that would be felt for centuries. Yet, in the midst of all the destruction, the Mongols also left behind something incredible: the revival of trade along the Silk Road. This vast network of trade routes connected East Asia, the Middle East, and Europe, allowing goods, ideas, and cultures to flow between civilizations. The Mongol Empire, through its conquests, restored much of this trade, making the empire not only a military powerhouse, but also a central player in the global economy of the time. The Mongols ensured the protection of merchants and travelers, which in turn led to the safe passage of goods like silk, spices, and precious metals. This revitalization of trade brought wealth and prosperity to many regions, even those conquered by the Mongols. At the same time, the Mongol Empire was a cultural crossroads, bringing together people from different regions of the world. The Mongols were tolerant of different religions, often allowing people to practice their beliefs freely, whether they were Muslims, Christians, Buddhists, or others. This cultural openness led to a fascinating blending of ideas and traditions, which would later shape the course of history. However, the Mongols' relationship with the Chinese people, particularly in the Yuan dynasty, was more complicated. The Mongol rulers, led by Genghis Khan's descendants, faced resistance from the Chinese, who viewed the Mongols as foreign invaders. Yet, the Mongols managed to consolidate their power in China and create one of the most enduring dynasties in Chinese history. Despite the occasional friction, the Yuan dynasty brought significant advancements, such as the construction of an extensive road network and the standardization of currency, which helped further integrate China into the global economy. The Mongol influence on China was profound, shaping the nation's development for centuries to come. As the Mongol Empire continued to expand, its reach grew ever more ambitious. The Golden Horde, one of the four main divisions of the empire, brought the Mongols to Russia and Eastern Europe. In Russia, the Mongols imposed a tribute system, extracting wealth from the local populations and forcing them to submit to Mongol rule. The legacy of Mongol domination in Russia is still visible today, particularly in the country's political and cultural structures. In Eastern Europe, the Mongols pushed as far as Poland, Hungary, and the Balkans, leaving a trail of destruction in their wake. Some historians argue that the Mongol presence in Europe had long-lasting effects on the development of European warfare and politics. The Mongols' advanced military tactics and their ability to quickly mobilize large armies forced European states to rethink their military strategies. In this sense, the Mongols didn't just change the regions they conquered. They also had a profound impact on the world beyond their borders. But as we reach the zenith of Mongol power, the inevitable question arises: how could such an immense empire, built on conquest and innovation, begin to unravel? The answer lies partly in the sheer size of the empire. As the Mongols expanded, they encountered internal divisions, succession disputes, and the difficulties of managing such a vast territory. After Genghis Khan's death in 1227, his sons and grandsons inherited the empire, but they struggled to maintain control. As the empire splintered, regional leaders began to assert their independence, and the Mongols were gradually pushed back in several regions. The disintegration of Mongol power was a slow, gradual process. An empire that had once been united under one banner eventually fractured into smaller entities. The Mongol Empire's legacy, however, would never fade entirely. As the Mongol Empire began to splinter, its immense territorial expanse started to lose its unity. The once tightly knit Mongol leadership, driven by the relentless ambition of Genghis Khan, began to fracture due to internal struggles and the challenge of holding together such a vast realm. After Genghis Khan's death in 1227, the Mongol Empire was divided among his four sons, each taking control of a significant portion of the empire. His eldest son Jebe took control of the Mongol heartland, while his second son, Chagatai, oversaw Central Asia. The third son, Gedai, ruled over much of northern China, and the youngest son, Tolui, controlled the western regions. Historians often debate whether Genghis Khan's decision to divide the empire among his sons weakened the Mongol Empire in the long run. Some argue that his foresight was instrumental in securing Mongol power after his death, while others claim that the division left the empire vulnerable to fragmentation and internal strife. Regardless of which interpretation is more accurate, it's clear that the lack of a unified leadership following Genghis Khan's passing contributed to the Mongol Empire's eventual downfall. One of the key challenges that the Mongols faced was the difficulty of maintaining control over their massive empire. With its vast expanse stretching from the steppes of Mongolia all the way to the Middle East and Eastern Europe, the empire was difficult to govern. Communication between the different parts of the empire was slow, and as the distance between the Mongol rulers and their subjects increased, so too did the autonomy of local leaders. This made it challenging for the Mongols to effectively administer such a vast and diverse empire. The Mongols had already faced significant resistance from various peoples and cultures, but the increasing decentralization of their empire left them vulnerable to internal rebellion and foreign invasion. The disintegration of the Mongol Empire wasn't just due to external factors. Internal power struggles, dynastic rivalries, and the challenge of managing a sprawling empire all played a role in its decline. As the Mongols became less unified, regional powers began to emerge, challenging Mongol control and autonomy. The Golden Horde, which had once been a powerful force in Russia, began to lose its dominance, with local Russian princes gradually gaining more power and independence. Meanwhile, in China, the Yuan dynasty, which was established by Genghis Khan's grandson Kublai Khan, continued to face resistance from the local population. The Mongol rulers, though initially successful in consolidating power, struggled to win the hearts and minds of the Chinese people. The Chinese, who had a long and rich cultural history, often viewed the Mongols as foreign invaders, and many resented their rule. Over time, this dissatisfaction led to widespread revolts, which further weakened the Mongol grip on China. Eventually, in 1368, the Yuan dynasty was overthrown, and the Ming dynasty emerged in its place, signaling the end of Mongol rule in China. The decline of Mongol power in China was a significant blow to the empire as a whole, as it represented the loss of one of the most important and prosperous regions under Mongol control. However, despite the weakening of Mongol power in many areas, the legacy of the Mongol Empire continued to be felt across the globe. The empire had left an indelible mark on history and its influence on global trade, culture, and politics could not be erased. One of the most significant ways in which the Mongols impacted the world was through the revitalization of the Silk Road under Mongol rule. The once dominant trade routes that connected East Asia with Europe were reopened, allowing for the exchange of goods, ideas, and technologies between the two continents. This revival of trade had far-reaching consequences, sparking the spread of knowledge, culture, and innovation across the Eurasian continent. In fact, some historians argue that the Mongols played a pivotal role in the development of the Renaissance in Europe, as the influx of goods and knowledge from the East helped fuel the intellectual and artistic growth that characterized the period. The Mongols also left their mark on the military tactics of the regions they conquered. Their use of cavalry, archery, and psychological warfare influenced the development of military strategies in both the East and West. The Mongols' ability to strike quickly and decisively, using deceptive tactics to confuse and disorient their enemies, became a model for future military leaders. Their siege techniques, which involved the use of advanced weaponry and siege engines, were also adopted by other empires and nations. The Mongols' legacy in warfare was not only a testament to their military prowess, but also to their innovative approach to battle. Another important aspect of the Mongol legacy was their approach to governance. While the Mongols were known for their ruthlessness in battle, they were also pragmatic rulers who sought to incorporate elements of the cultures they conquered into their own administrative systems. In many cases, the Mongols appointed local rulers and administrators to govern their territories, allowing them to maintain control while also preserving local customs and traditions. This policy of religious and cultural tolerance helped the Mongols maintain stability in their empire, as it allowed them to coexist with the diverse peoples and faiths that they ruled. The Mongols also promoted trade and commerce, ensuring that merchants and travelers were protected on the roads, which further facilitated the exchange of goods and ideas across the empire. Despite the eventual collapse of the Mongol Empire, the legacy of Genghis Khan and his descendants continued to influence the world for centuries after their reign. The Mongols' ability to unite vast regions, their contributions to global trade, and their military innovations all played a significant role in shaping the course of history. Historians still debate the impact of the Mongol Empire on the world, with some arguing that it was a force for progress, while others view it as a destructive force. Regardless of one's perspective, there's no denying that the Mongols changed the world in ways that are still felt today. Today, the Mongol Empire is remembered not just for its conquests, but for its far-reaching influence on world history. The Mongols, under the leadership of Genghis Khan, created an empire that spanned continents, transforming the political, economic, and cultural landscapes of the regions they touched. Even as the empire fragmented and eventually fell apart, the Mongols' legacy continued to shape the world for centuries, leaving behind a complex and enduring imprint on history. Historians still argue about the nature of the Mongol Empire's legacy. Was it a brutal force of conquest, or a force that helped to shape the world into the interconnected place we know today? The answer, as with most things in history, is somewhere in between. But one thing is certain: the Mongol Empire was a monumental force that changed the course of history forever. By the time Genghis Khan's grandsons took over the Mongol Empire, their ancestors' dream of unity had splintered into regional factions. These successors, including figures like Kublai Khan, Hulagu, and others, each took charge of vast portions of the empire but struggled to maintain the cohesion that their grandfather had forged through sheer force and vision. In some ways, the fate of the Mongol Empire mirrored that of many empires. Its immense power, gained through conquest and innovation, made it incredibly difficult to sustain, and eventually it fell victim to internal divisions and external pressures. The challenge for the Mongol heirs was clear. How could they maintain the Mongol dream, an empire founded on unity and innovation, when the empire was now a fragmented patchwork of different regions and cultures? Historians often debate how much Genghis Khan's early ambition shaped the future trajectory of the Mongol Empire, especially as his successors tried to pick up the pieces of a fractured vision. Could his empire have endured longer had his successors been more unified? Or were the empire's internal fractures simply the inevitable result of the sheer scope of what the Mongols had achieved? These are questions that remain a topic of scholarly debate to this day. One of the most significant divisions in the empire occurred in the far west, with the creation of the Ilkhanate, which encompassed Persia and parts of the Middle East. Here, the Mongols continued to exercise their power, but as time passed, their grip weakened as local dynasties and rulers took back control. In the east, Kublai Khan's Yuan dynasty continued to rule over China, but, like many other Mongol states, it was not immune to the rising discontent among its subjects. The Mongols' foreignness, combined with their heavy-handed rule, led to widespread resentment. The Chinese, with their deeply entrenched dynastic history and culture, struggled to accept Mongol overlordship. After decades of Mongol rule, this discontent would culminate in a massive uprising, the Red Turban Rebellion, which eventually led to the fall of the Yuan dynasty and the rise of the Ming dynasty in 1368. This marked the end of Mongol rule in China, and though the Mongols had made their mark on the region, their empire in the east was no more. Kublai Khan's reign, while groundbreaking in many ways, became the last chapter of Mongol rule in China. His successors, unable to quell the growing rebellion, saw the rapid unraveling of their hold on China, which in turn became one of the key events in the overall decline of the Mongol Empire. To the west, the Golden Horde continued to hold sway over Russia for centuries, but their power too began to erode over time. The fragmentation of the empire allowed local rulers to emerge as powerful players in their own right. The Grand Duchy of Moscow, in particular, began to assert its independence from the Mongols. Ivan III of Russia, also known as Ivan the Great, famously refused to pay tribute to the Mongols and eventually declared Moscow's independence from the Mongol rule. This marked the beginning of the end for the Mongol presence in Russia, with the Grand Duchy of Moscow emerging as the dominant power in the region. However, the Mongol legacy in Russia was far from forgotten. Despite their eventual departure, the Mongols had left an indelible imprint on Russian culture and politics, including the centralization of power, which would influence the Russian Tsars for centuries to come. The legacy of the Mongol Empire is often discussed in terms of its impact on the regions it conquered. One of the most significant effects of Mongol rule was the facilitation of trade across the vast territories they controlled. The Mongols were instrumental in reopening and revitalizing the Silk Road, the ancient network of trade routes that had connected East Asia with Europe for centuries. Under Mongol rule, merchants, travelers, and diplomats could move freely across the empire, contributing to the exchange of goods, knowledge, and technology between the East and West. The Mongols protected merchants and their goods, and the Pax Mongolica, or Mongol peace, allowed for an unprecedented level of trade between cultures. Silk, spices, precious metals, and other goods flowed from the east to the west, while ideas and innovations, such as gunpowder and paper, were brought back to China and the Mongol heartland. The revival of the Silk Road during the Mongol period is often credited with facilitating the global exchange of knowledge and culture that helped lay the foundation for the Renaissance in Europe. Yet, even as the Mongols facilitated trade, they left a legacy of destruction. Their rapid and violent conquests led to the destruction of entire cities and cultures. The sacking of Baghdad, the destruction of the Khwarezmian Empire, and the devastation of countless cities in Central Asia and Eastern Europe left lasting scars. Many historians argue that the Mongols' methods of conquest, while effective also, led to the loss of cultural and intellectual wealth. Entire libraries were destroyed, and the once thriving cities of the Islamic world were razed to the ground. In some cases, entire populations were wiped out, leaving only the ruins of former glory. The Mongol invasions were brutal and unforgiving, and for the people who lived through them, the cost of Mongol conquest was far more than just territory. It was the loss of identity, culture, and history. Despite the violence and destruction that marked much of the Mongol conquests, the empire also left behind a legacy of tolerance and cultural exchange. One of the most striking features of Mongol rule was their policy of religious and cultural tolerance. Genghis Khan and his successors allowed the people they conquered to practice their own religions and traditions. The Mongols themselves were shamanistic, but they were open to other belief systems, including Islam, Christianity, and Buddhism. This tolerance helped to foster a rich cultural exchange across the empire. The Mongols were also keenly interested in learning from the civilizations they conquered, and they often sought to incorporate new ideas and technologies into their own society. For example, after the conquest of China, the Mongols adopted many Chinese administrative practices, including the use of paper money and the development of an efficient postal system. Similarly, Mongol rulers adopted Persian and Islamic cultural traditions, which helped to shape their courtly and administrative practices. In the end, the Mongol Empire was a paradox. It was both a destructive force and a catalyst for cultural exchange. Its legacy is complex, and historians continue to debate its overall impact on the world. Some view the Mongols as brutal conquerors, while others see them as a force that helped to shape the modern world through trade, cultural exchange, and the spread of new ideas. Regardless of how one views the Mongols, there is no denying the indelible impact they had on the course of history. From the Silk Road to the rise of Moscow, from the fall of Baghdad to the establishment of the Yuan dynasty, the Mongols shaped the world in ways that are still felt today. By the late 14th century, the Mongol Empire, once the most powerful force in the world, had experienced a steady decline. The once unified empire had split into 4 distinct khanates, each ruled by descendants of Genghis Khan. As we've seen, the division led to fragmentation and regional independence, weakening the Mongol grip over vast territories. But even in its fractured state, the influence of the Mongols could still be felt across the world, especially in the realm of trade. The Mongol revival of the Silk Road was one of their most enduring legacies, facilitating the exchange of goods and ideas between the East and West. It's important to remember that the Mongol Empire's vast reach allowed for the most globalized trade network of the medieval world. For centuries, goods like silk, spices, and tea traveled along these routes. But the connections were more than just about commodities. They were about the exchange of knowledge, culture, and technologies. The movement of goods between the Mongol regions of China, Central Asia, the Middle East, and Europe allowed for the sharing of ideas, philosophies, and innovations. Gunpowder, paper-making, and even printing spread from China to the West through Mongol-controlled territories, paving the way for the Renaissance in Europe. While historians still debate the extent of the Mongols' contribution to the Renaissance, it's undeniable that their role in reopening and maintaining trade routes changed the course of history. This trade network, the foundation of what we now call globalization, may not have existed without the Mongols' vision of empire. As the Mongols continued to rule over disparate regions, their legacy continued to shape global history, even as the empire fractured. One of the most significant aspects of Mongol governance was the relative religious tolerance they practiced. Unlike many other conquerors, the Mongols allowed the cultures and religions of the regions they conquered to continue to flourish. This policy was in stark contrast to the religious persecution practiced by many other empires at the time. Genghis Khan himself, despite being a shamanist, was incredibly tolerant of different faiths and saw religion as a personal matter. This view was passed on by his descendants, who continued to allow conquered peoples to practice their faiths without interference. This cultural openness facilitated the exchange of religious and philosophical ideas throughout the empire. In Central Asia, Buddhism, Islam, and Christianity coexisted peacefully under Mongol rule. In the Middle East, the Mongols' acceptance of Islam, despite their early invasions of Muslim lands, allowed for a period of cultural revival in the region. This religious tolerance, alongside their embrace of diverse cultures, helped make the Mongol Empire a unique entity in world history. It's clear that the Mongols, despite their violent conquests, also played a role in fostering tolerance, integration, and exchange on a scale never seen before. But while the Mongols' policies were progressive in some areas, their military tactics remained brutal and unforgiving. One of the most notable aspects of their conquests was their psychological warfare. Genghis Khan was known for using terror as a strategic weapon. Cities that resisted Mongol rule often suffered horrifying consequences: mass executions, destruction of crops, and the complete annihilation of civilian populations. Some historians argue that Genghis Khan's use of terror was a calculated decision aimed at intimidating others into submission, thus avoiding prolonged battles. The idea was simple: strike fear into your enemies so that they would surrender without a fight. This ruthless tactic, though highly effective, left behind a trail of death and destruction in places like Central Asia, the Middle East, and Eastern Europe. The Mongols' conquests were not just military victories, but also societal upheavals. Whole cities, such as the famed city of Samarkand, were reduced to rubble, and entire civilizations were erased from the map. The Mongols' siege tactics were legendary. They were capable of destroying even the most fortified cities. Their success, in many ways, relied on their ability to adapt to different types of warfare. Whether that was using advanced siege engines or cavalry charges, despite their terrifying reputation, the Mongols were also innovators in warfare. Khan's army was organized in a way that maximized efficiency and coordination. Their military units, called tumans, were made up of 10,000 men, each divided into smaller units. This structure allowed them to quickly adapt to changing battle conditions and respond with precision. The Mongols also employed highly skilled horse archers, who could rain arrows on their enemies from a distance and then retreat quickly before the enemy could retaliate. This style of warfare, which emphasized mobility, speed, and surprise, made the Mongols incredibly difficult to defeat. Even their enemies had to acknowledge the Mongols' military prowess. In fact, the Mongols' ability to adapt to the terrain, whether it was the icy plains of Russia or the deserts of Persia, made them formidable opponents. But as the centuries passed, the once mighty Mongol Empire began to crumble under the weight of its size and internal divisions. As the different Khanates drifted apart, they lost the coordination and unity that had made them so successful under Genghis Khan's leadership. While some Mongol rulers, such as Timur Tamerlane, attempted to restore the empire's former glory, they never quite succeeded in recreating the empire's previous power. The rise of new empires, such as the Ottoman Empire in the West and the Ming Dynasty in China, further eroded Mongol control. The Golden Horde in Russia weakened, and by the 15th century, the last remnants of the Mongol Empire in the East had disappeared. The final fall of the empire was a slow and painful process, but it was inevitable. The challenges of governing such a vast and diverse empire, coupled with internal divisions and the rise of powerful rivals, ultimately led to its disintegration. Yet, even as the Mongol Empire crumbled, its legacy lived on. The empire had reshaped the world in ways that would continue to be felt for centuries. Historians continue to debate the lasting impact of the Mongol Empire. Some see them as a brutal force of destruction, while others argue that they were a force for progress. connecting distant parts of the world and facilitating the exchange of goods and ideas. Regardless of the perspective, the Mongol Empire's impact on world history is undeniable. From the Silk Road to the spread of knowledge, from military innovations to cultural exchanges, the Mongols helped shape the course of history. And although their empire may have fallen, their influence continues to resonate in the world today. The Mongols proved that an empire built on conquest and brutality could also be a force for cultural exchange, trade, and the movement of ideas across continents. Their legacy is complex, but it is certainly one of the most fascinating chapters in world history. As we reflect on the rise and fall of the Mongol Empire, we see that the story of Genghis Khan and his successors is not just one of conquest and military might, but also one of vision, strategy, and complexity. The empire's impact reverberated through the centuries, affecting cultures, economies, and political systems far beyond the immediate territories they conquered. From the steppes of Mongolia to the deserts of Persia, the Mongols imposed their presence on the world in ways both destructive and transformative. And while the empire eventually fragmented and crumbled, its legacy is evident in every corner of the world today. It's often said that empires are made through conquest and maintained through governance, and the Mongols were no exception. Yet, unlike many empires throughout history, the Mongols were able to govern vast and diverse regions, uniting different cultures, religions, and peoples under a single banner. This wasn't because of brute force alone, but because of the vision of Genghis Khan, who saw the value of unity and the importance of cooperation across cultures. For all the violence and destruction they unleashed, the Mongols were also masters of diplomacy, using alliances, trade agreements, and religious tolerance to cement their rule over vast stretches of territory. The Mongol Empire's political structure was revolutionary in its own way, focusing on merit over birthright. Genghis Khan, unlike other monarchs of his time, created a system where individuals could rise through the ranks based on their skill, loyalty, and competence, rather than their noble lineage. This system allowed talented military commanders and administrators to gain positions of power regardless of their background. By favoring merit, Genghis Khan created a highly efficient and capable ruling structure that helped ensure the success of the Mongol Empire for a time. His vision of leadership was also embodied in his famous Yasa, a code of laws that governed everything from military strategy to social conduct. The Yasa was designed to create order, discipline, and cohesion within a diverse empire. While the laws themselves are not well documented, their influence on Mongol society is undeniable. They helped to solidify Genghis Khan's rule and ensured that his empire would continue to function even after his death. However, after his passing, the lack of a clear successor and the growing divisions within the empire created instability. The Mongol system, which had been so effective under Genghis Khan, began to unravel as his heirs fought for control. This internal strife weakened the empire's unity and left it vulnerable to external threats. The inability to maintain the cohesiveness that Genghis Khan had established was a critical factor in the empire's eventual decline. While the Mongol Empire's political and military strategies were impressive, it was their cultural and economic impact that continues to influence the world. One of the most significant effects of Mongol rule was the re-establishment and protection of the Silk Road, the ancient trade route that connected China, Central Asia, the Middle East, and Europe. By securing the safety of merchants and travelers, the Mongols ensured the uninterrupted flow of goods, ideas, and innovations. Spices, silk, precious metals, and other commodities traveled along the Silk Road, enriching the economies of both the East and the West. But it wasn't just goods that moved along these trade routes. Philosophies and technologies also crossed borders. The Mongols played a key role in spreading innovations such as papermaking, printing, and gunpowder. These technologies would later have profound impacts on both Europe and the rest of the world. It's hard to imagine the Renaissance, the age of exploration, or the Industrial Revolution without the Mongols' facilitation of this global exchange. In fact, many historians argue that the Mongol Empire was one of the driving forces behind the interconnectedness of the world in the centuries that followed. Without the Mongols' contributions, it's possible that global trade and cultural exchange would not have flourished in the way that they did. However, the legacy of the Mongols is not without its darker side. For all the trade, cultural exchange, and technological innovation they facilitated, the Mongol invasions were also marked by extreme violence. The sacking of cities, the slaughter of civilian populations, and the destruction of entire civilizations have left deep scars in the historical memory of many regions. The Mongols were not just conquerors, they were also masters of terror. In places like Central Asia, Eastern Europe, and the Middle East, entire populations were wiped out as the Mongols sought to break the will of their enemies. The psychological warfare employed by Genghis Khan and his successors was brutal. Cities that resisted Mongol rule were often annihilated. This reign of terror was a key part of the Mongol strategy. By destroying entire cities and killing thousands, the Mongols sought to intimidate other cities into surrender. It's said that the Mongols used fear as a weapon, striking terror into the hearts of those who might dare to resist. In this sense, the Mongol Empire was built on a foundation of both military genius and psychological warfare. The cost of this approach was immense, and the destruction they left in their wake is still remembered today. Yet, even in the face of this devastation, the Mongols' influence on the world persisted. One of the most enduring legacies of the Mongol Empire is the cultural exchange that took place during their rule. Despite their military conquests, the Mongols were remarkably open to different cultures, religions, and traditions. Under Mongol rule, the people of the empire were allowed to practice their own faiths and follow their own customs. This religious tolerance was one of the hallmarks of Mongol governance. Unlike other conquerors, the Mongols did not seek to impose their beliefs on the people they ruled. Instead, they allowed for a rich tapestry of cultures and religions to coexist. This policy of tolerance not only helped to foster stability within the empire, but also facilitated the exchange of ideas and knowledge, from China to the Middle East, from Europe to Central Asia. The Mongols created a melting pot of cultures and traditions, paving the way for the global exchange of ideas that would shape the modern world as the centuries passed. The Mongol Empire eventually fragmented, and its once great unity dissolved. Yet, its influence continued to echo throughout history. Even today, we see the Mongol legacy in the way nations interact, trade, and exchange knowledge. From the development of the modern world's trade routes to the spread of technological innovations, the Mongol Empire helped lay the groundwork for the interconnected world we live in today. Historians still debate the true nature of the Mongol legacy, whether it was one of destruction or innovation, of terror or cultural exchange. In many ways, the answer is both. The Mongols were both a force of conquest and a catalyst for progress. They shaped the world in ways that are still being felt centuries after their empire crumbled. In the end, the Mongol Empire was one of history's most remarkable and complex empires, a testament to the power of ambition, vision, and the desire to leave a mark on the world. As the Mongol Empire fractured and eventually faded into history, its impact on the world remained undeniable. The world of the 21st century, despite its vast advancements in technology, global trade, and cultural integration, still bears the fingerprints of the Mongol Empire's strategies, politics, and innovations. In many ways, the empire laid the groundwork for modern global exchanges, both in terms of trade routes and the interconnectedness of different cultures. As the Mongol leaders and their successors spread out from their homeland in Mongolia, they created one of the most vast and interconnected empires in history, leaving behind a legacy that was felt in parts of the world long after the last Mongol ruler's death. One of the most obvious legacies of the Mongol Empire was the expansion and protection of the Silk Road. This ancient network of trade routes, connecting East Asia with the Mediterranean and Europe, had seen its golden age centuries before the Mongols came to power. But it was under their rule that the Silk Road became a thriving hub of commerce, culture, and ideas, bridging the gap between the East and the West. By securing the safety of merchants and travelers, the Mongols allowed for goods, ideas, technologies, and philosophies to flow freely across vast distances. Spices, silks, and precious metals traveled from China, India, and the Far East to Europe, while Western inventions, like glassware and mechanical devices, made their way to the East. This exchange of goods and ideas was not just limited to commodities. Knowledge about medicine, astronomy, and philosophy crossed borders, paving the way for the Renaissance and the age of exploration in Europe. Historians often argue that the Mongol Empire, with its strategic efforts to unify and secure these trade routes, was instrumental in laying the foundation for the global exchange of ideas that defined the modern world. Without the Mongols, the spread of important technologies such as paper-making, printing, and gunpowder might have been delayed, altering the course of history dramatically. Alongside this economic and cultural exchange, the Mongols also left behind a unique imprint on governance and leadership. The system Genghis Khan put into place, which emphasized meritocracy and loyalty over traditional aristocratic succession, was revolutionary in its time. The Mongols chose their leaders not based on birthright, but on ability. This system allowed for individuals to rise to positions of power based on their skills, intelligence, and loyalty, rather than their family background or noble status. Genghis Khan's successors maintained this structure for some time, and it created a more efficient and capable administration than many other contemporary empires. The Mongols promoted an organizational structure that enabled them to manage their vast territories with remarkable effectiveness. Even as the empire, fractured elements of this meritocratic system remained, influencing the governance of successor states and even later empires. In Russia, for example, Mongol rule introduced practices of centralized governance that would go on to influence Russian rulers long after the Mongols left. The principles of merit-based promotion and efficient military organization that the Mongols employed were adopted by several empires in the centuries to come, shaping the future of governance and administration in parts of Europe, Asia, and the Middle East. However, the Mongol Empire's immense power also came at a heavy price. The empire was built on conquest, and much of its expansion involved brutal campaigns and widespread devastation. The Mongols' military strategies were unmatched in their speed and efficiency, but they were also marked by extreme violence. Entire cities were wiped out in Mongol campaigns, and those who resisted Mongol rule often suffered horrific consequences. The sieges of cities like Baghdad and Nishapur became infamous for their scale of destruction and the mass slaughter of civilians. The Mongols' psychological warfare, wherein they used fear and terror to induce surrender, left deep scars on the cultures they conquered. Whole populations were massacred in the wake of Mongol victories, and cities that resisted were not only destroyed but sometimes erased from history. The destruction of the House of Wisdom in Baghdad, a crucial center of learning in the Islamic world, is often cited as one of the most tragic losses of knowledge and culture in human history. For many, the Mongols' reign remains synonymous with brutality and devastation. The destruction they wrought was so extensive that entire civilizations were left to rebuild from the ground up. This violence is an inescapable aspect of the Mongol Empire's legacy, one that continues to shape the way the Mongols are remembered in many parts of the world. Yet, despite the violence, the Mongols also fostered the spread of knowledge and cultural exchange, which helped to soften the edge of their brutal expansion. The paradox of the Mongol Empire lies in its ability to create both devastation and connection. While the empire's military conquests were violent and harsh, the Mongols were also responsible for some of the most significant global exchanges of the medieval world. Their conquests often led to the destruction of cities and civilizations, but they also led to the creation of the Pax Mongolica, or Mongol peace, a period in which trade flourished and cultural exchange was at an all-time high. The Mongols' ability to maintain relative stability over such a vast empire, despite constant upheaval and division, was remarkable. Their system of communication and governance, which included a vast network of spies, postal systems, and administrative regions, enabled them to govern large swaths of territory efficiently. Despite the internal strife that followed Genghis Khan's death, the Mongols left behind a legacy of interconnectedness that would influence the world for centuries. In Russia, the Mongol invasion left a lasting impact on the political landscape. The Mongol yoke over the Russian principalities lasted for nearly 250 years, and during this period, Russia developed a centralized form of government that would become the model for later Tsars. Many of the techniques employed by the Mongols in their conquests, such as the organization of military units and the use of diplomacy alongside force, were adopted by Russian leaders. Even after the Mongols were driven out, the influence of their governance lingered in the Russian state. The development of a strong, centralized monarchy in Russia, along with the unification of the Russian territories, can be traced back to the Mongol era. As the Mongol Empire gradually dissolved and fragmented, the regions once under Mongol control began to rise as independent powers. The Golden Horde, once a formidable force, broke apart, and Russia began to reclaim its independence. In China, the Yuan dynasty fell, but the Mongol influence was felt long after their departure. The Ming dynasty, which rose from the ashes of the Yuan dynasty, inherited much of the administrative framework and the trade policies introduced by the Mongols. Even in the Middle East, where the Ilkhanate had once dominated, the influence of Mongol rule remained visible in the way cities were governed and the way trade was structured. In the end, the Mongol Empire's influence was not merely one of conquest and destruction, but of profound transformation. Its legacy cannot be understood solely through the lens of military might or the violence it inflicted on its enemies. The Mongols were also agents of change, carrying goods, technologies, and ideas from one side of the world to the other. Their rule paved the way for a new era of global interconnectedness, one that would lay the foundation for the modern world. The Empire's complex and multifaceted legacy continues to shape our understanding of the past, and in many ways, it serves as a reminder of the enduring power of human ambition, innovation, and resilience. The slow dissolution of the Mongol Empire by the 15th century did not signal the complete end of their influence, but instead marked the beginning of the shifting sands that would shape the global landscape. Even as the once mighty empire fractured into regional factions, the legacy of the Mongols continued to ripple across continents. These lasting impacts were not always immediately visible, but became apparent in the centuries that followed. Despite the Mongols' eventual withdrawal from much of their former territory, the systems they established for governance, trade, and cultural exchange persisted and continued to influence societies far beyond their original borders. The centralization of power in Russia, the trade routes that connected East and West, and the religious tolerance that characterized Mongol rule all continued to shape the development of the modern world. Some historians argue that the Mongols, despite the violence of their conquests, were the architects of a new world order, one that set the stage for the global interactions that would come to define the modern era. The vast Mongol Empire, for all its fragmentation, provided a vital bridge between two disparate worlds, the East and the West. This linkage was forged through the Silk Road, but it was not limited to material trade alone. It was on this route that the ideas, technologies, and philosophies of one world met those of another. The transmission of knowledge from the East to the West was made possible by the Mongols, who maintained the peace required for this exchange to occur. It's often said that the Renaissance in Europe would not have been possible without the influx of ideas from the East, which were facilitated by Mongol rule. The Mongols ensured the flow of goods like paper, gunpowder, and printing technology across their empire, which would later have profound consequences on European history. It was through the Mongols that ideas from China and the Islamic world reached the West, triggering a series of intellectual and technological advances that would help shape the course of European civilization. While the Mongol Empire may have crumbled, the legacy of their cultural exchanges lived on, sparking new ideas and directions in art, science, and politics. In addition to facilitating the movement of goods and ideas, the Mongols' establishment of a vast postal system helped connect the empire's far-reaching corners, allowing for better communication and coordination among the different regions. This postal system, known as the Yam, was an early example of a state-sponsored communication infrastructure that would later be adopted by many other empires. The Yam provided a network of relay stations where messengers could rest, resupply, and exchange information. With this system, the Mongols were able to send messages at astonishing speeds, allowing them to maintain control over their vast territories despite their size and diversity. The effectiveness of this communication system was one of the reasons the Mongols were able to consolidate their empire so efficiently and extend their rule over such large areas, even after the Mongol Empire had fractured. The concept of state-controlled communication networks would be adopted and adapted by future empires, influencing the way states interacted and exchanged information for centuries. Yet, despite the cultural and technological advancements brought about by Mongol rule, many regions that once lived under Mongol domination would eventually seek to break free from their grasp. In China, for example, the Yuan dynasty, established by Kublai Khan, though initially successful, eventually succumbed to widespread dissatisfaction. Many of the Han Chinese population resented Mongol rule, seeing the Mongols as foreign invaders who had disrupted their dynastic traditions. This unrest culminated in the rise of the Ming dynasty, which overthrew the Mongols and restored native Chinese rule. The rebellion against Mongol rule was not only a struggle for political power, but also for cultural identity. As the Chinese people sought to reassert their centuries-old traditions and values, the fall of the Yuan dynasty, though a significant blow to Mongol power, did not erase the imprint the Mongols left on China. The Mongol period had lasting effects on Chinese governance, infrastructure, and cultural exchange, and many of the practices established during the Yuan dynasty continued to influence the Ming and subsequent Chinese dynasties. The Mongols' period of rule, though short-lived in comparison to other Chinese dynasties, altered China's trajectory in ways that would resonate throughout history. The Mongols' influence in Russia is another area where their legacy continued long after their empire collapsed. The Mongol yoke, as it is often called, had a profound impact on the political structure of the Russian principalities. For nearly 2.5 centuries, the Mongols dominated the Russian territories, extracting tribute and asserting their control. However, their presence also had lasting effects on the way Russian rulers would later govern. Many of the administrative practices, such as centralizing power and using a strong, autocratic ruler, were adopted by the Russian Tsars, who would go on to form a centralized Russian state. The Mongols' experience with governing a vast and diverse empire left a legacy of effective bureaucracy and statecraft that would be inherited by Russian leaders. When Ivan III, known as Ivan the Great, broke free from Mongol rule in the 15th century, he not only rejected Mongol domination but also took many of the administrative systems and governance practices with him. The Mongols, in their quest to conquer, had unwittingly shaped the future political structure of Russia. The Mongols' influence also extended to the Islamic world, particularly in Persia, where the Ilkhanate Mongols ruled after the fall of the Abbasid Caliphate. Despite their violent beginnings in the region, the Ilkhanate eventually integrated with local Persian culture and became patrons of the arts, literature, and architecture. The Mongols in Persia adopted many aspects of Islamic culture, including the Persian language and artistic styles, leading to a fusion of Mongol and Persian traditions. This blending of cultures, however, did not come without tension. Many traditional Persian elites initially resisted Mongol rule, viewing them as barbaric invaders. Over time, however, the Mongols adapted to the local culture, and under their rule, Persia became one of the most advanced regions in the Islamic world, contributing to the cultural and scientific advances of the Middle Ages. This Mongol-Persian synthesis played a crucial role in shaping the history of the region, influencing not only the politics but also the arts and sciences that would flourish in the centuries to come. Throughout history, the Mongols have been seen in many lights, destroyers and agents of cultural exchange. Their empire, though short-lived in terms of a unified political structure, shaped the modern world in profound ways. They were a paradox, both brutal and visionary, destructive yet facilitating cultural exchange and trade. While the empire's collapse came as a result of internal divisions, external pressures, and the difficulty of governing such a vast realm, its legacy endures. From the Silk Road to the development of modern statecraft, the Mongol Empire's influence is woven into the fabric of world history. It is a reminder that even the most powerful empires can fracture and fall, but the ripple effects of their rise can echo across centuries, shaping the course of civilization in unexpected ways. As the dust of the Mongol Empire's disintegration settled, its once vast dominion fragmented into several independent kingdoms and regions, each governed by the descendants of Genghis Khan or other regional powers that had risen in the wake of the empire's collapse. Despite this fragmentation, the influence of the Mongol Empire remained far-reaching, resonating through the centuries in ways both profound and subtle. The world that emerged in the wake of Mongol rule was undeniably different from the one that had existed before their conquests, as the empire had forged lasting links between East and West that would shape the course of global history for generations to come. One of the lasting marks of Mongol rule is the manner in which they connected distant regions and peoples, facilitating an exchange of goods, ideas, technologies, and cultures. The Mongols themselves were an empire that spanned vast distances, from the steppes of Mongolia to the Middle East, and their network of trade routes helped to unite a divided world. The Silk Road, for instance, was brought back to life under the Mongols. And though the Mongol Empire itself fell, the roads that the Mongols secured continued to thrive, enabling the flow of commodities and cultural exchange that would define the course of global interaction. While the Mongols did not invent the Silk Road, they ensured its security, allowing goods, philosophies, and technologies to traverse the lands that they controlled, making them central to the development of the world as we know it today. Goods like silk, spices, and precious metals were traded freely, but even more significant was the exchange of ideas and knowledge that traveled along these same routes. It's difficult to overstate the transformative role the Mongols played in facilitating this global exchange before their conquests. The Silk Road had fallen into decline due to the rise of powerful regional kingdoms that disrupted the flow of goods and information. The Mongols, however, restored and protected these ancient trade routes, providing a sense of stability that had been absent for centuries. Through the Pax Mongolica, the Mongols brought peace to the trade routes across Eurasia, allowing merchants, scholars, and travelers to safely journey from China to the Mediterranean. In addition to material goods, the Mongols facilitated the exchange of innovative technologies such as gunpowder, papermaking, and printing. These inventions, which originated in China, had a transformative effect on the West, sparking a revolution in both warfare and communication. The Mongols, despite their violent conquests, were not just conquerors but also catalysts for the spread of technological knowledge and cultural exchange. The Italian explorer Marco Polo, who famously traveled to the Mongol Empire, returned to Europe with stories of the technological marvels and cultural riches he had encountered in China, offering Europeans a window into a world previously unknown to them. Polo's writings would go on to inspire European explorers and traders, including those who eventually set sail for the Americas. But the Mongols' contribution to global exchange went beyond the tangible commodities and technologies they helped spread. The Mongols facilitated the movement of people and ideas, bringing together diverse cultures and fostering an exchange of religious beliefs, philosophies, and practices. The empire itself was a melting pot of different cultures, religions, and languages, from the polytheistic Mongol shamans to the Muslims of Persia, the Buddhists of Tibet, and the Christians of the Caucasus. Genghis Khan's policy of religious tolerance, which allowed people to practice their faiths freely, further enhanced this cultural interchange. While the Mongols were often perceived as brutal conquerors, they were also remarkably progressive in their approach to governance, creating a society that, for the time, allowed for unprecedented cultural and religious diversity. This tolerance allowed new ideas to flourish. As people from different regions and backgrounds came into contact with one another and exchanged knowledge, it also helped ensure the Mongols' longevity, as it fostered loyalty and cooperation among the many peoples they ruled. Even as the Mongol Empire fragmented, its legacy of tolerance and cultural exchange would influence future empires and nation-states for centuries to come. While the Mongols are often remembered for their military prowess and the devastation they left in their wake, the legacy they left in terms of governance and administration is equally significant. The Mongol Empire's success was partly due to their innovative approach to leadership. Genghis Khan, in particular, developed a highly organized military and political system that enabled him to control vast territories with remarkable efficiency. The Mongols employed a decentralized system of government, allowing local rulers and administrators to retain some degree of autonomy while still answering to the central authority. This allowed the empire to govern its far-flung regions without the need for direct control over every aspect of daily life. The Mongols also established a set of laws, known as the Yasa, which regulated everything from military discipline to social conduct. Although the Yasa's specifics are not well documented, its influence on Mongol society is clear. It provided a framework for the empire's military and administrative operations, helping to create a cohesive system that allowed the Mongols to manage their vast territories effectively. The Mongols' ability to maintain unity in such a large empire was an impressive feat of governance, and their legacy can be seen in the way modern states organize their governments and armies. As the Mongol Empire fragmented, the regions it once ruled became home to new powers. The Golden Horde continued to influence Russia for centuries, even after its collapse, and Russia's eventual emergence as a powerful empire was influenced by the Mongol model of governance. In Persia, the Ilkhanate Mongols established a lasting impact on the region's culture and politics, blending Persian traditions with Mongol military practices. Meanwhile, the Mongols left a profound mark on China, where the Yuan dynasty, established by Kublai Khan, would eventually give way to the Ming dynasty. Though the Mongols were driven out of China, they left behind important infrastructure and administrative practices that would be inherited by the Ming. Throughout Central Asia, the legacy of Mongol rule was also felt, as local rulers and states built upon the systems and trade networks that the Mongols had established. Though the Mongol Empire as a whole may have disbanded, the influence of Mongol rule persisted long after their reigns had ended. The Mongols' influence also extended far beyond the borders of their empire. The Pax Mongolica, the period of relative peace that existed under Mongol rule, helped to create a sense of interconnectedness that spanned continents. The Mongol Empire's policies of trade and cultural exchange laid the foundation for the interconnected world we live in today. While the empire itself was short-lived in terms of its unity, the networks and systems that it put in place, such as trade routes, communication networks, and religious tolerance, would continue to shape the global landscape for centuries to come. The world may have moved on from the Mongol Empire, but its legacy still resonates today in the ways we interact, trade, and share knowledge across borders. Despite the fragmentation of the empire and the violence it left behind, the Mongols ultimately contributed to the development of a more interconnected world, one where people, goods, and ideas could flow more freely than ever before. In this way, the Mongols, while often remembered for their conquests and destruction, also played a crucial role in shaping the world we know today. As we look back on the Mongol Empire and its long-lasting effects on world history, we can't ignore the paradoxical nature of their rule. While the Mongols were seen as ruthless conquerors known for their unparalleled military efficiency and the terror they spread, their contributions to the world were multifaceted and far-reaching. The Mongol Empire, despite its eventual decline and fragmentation, left an indelible mark on the global stage. It was an empire that, at its height, connected the East and West in a way that no empire before it had ever done. One of the most lasting effects of Mongol rule was the creation of a vast interconnected network that allowed for the exchange of goods, ideas, and technologies, a system that helped to lay the foundation for the modern world. The Pax Mongolica, or Mongol peace, was a period of stability that lasted for centuries, despite the empire's eventual fragmentation. The peace provided by the Mongols enabled trade, migration, and the flow of knowledge across their vast domains. This era of relative peace, which spanned from China in the east to the Mediterranean in the west, allowed merchants, scientists, and philosophers to travel safely and exchange ideas. The flow of goods along the Silk Road, a trade route that the Mongols revitalized and protected, not only brought material wealth but also helped the cross-pollination of cultures, fostering an era of intellectual and cultural renaissance. Ideas about art, science, mathematics, and astronomy that had previously been confined to the East began to move westward, influencing everything from European science to Renaissance art. This exchange of ideas fundamentally changed the course of history. The Mongols were not simply brutal conquerors, but also shrewd statesmen. Under Genghis Khan and his successors, the Mongols developed a system of governance that was far ahead of its time. One of their most notable innovations was their meritocratic approach to leadership. Genghis Khan chose his generals and officials, not based on noble birth, but based on their abilities and loyalty. This allowed skilled men, regardless of their social status, to rise to positions of power, something that was virtually unheard of in the feudal systems of the time. This merit-based system was integral to the Mongol success, allowing them to manage a vast and diverse empire efficiently. As the empire expanded, the Mongols also established a complex administrative structure that helped maintain control over their territories. At its height, the Mongol Empire was divided into regions, each with a governor who answered directly to the Khan. These governors were responsible for maintaining order, collecting taxes, and ensuring the loyalty of the local population. The Mongols also utilized a network of spies and intelligence officers to monitor their empire's vast expanse, ensuring that they remained aware of any potential threats. This level of organization and control was a key factor in the Mongols. The ability to maintain such a large empire for so long. The Mongols were also instrumental in the spread of technologies and innovations that shaped the future of the world. The most notable of these innovations was the use of gunpowder. Originally developed in China, gunpowder was spread across the Mongol Empire and eventually to Europe, where it revolutionized warfare. The Mongols were also responsible for the spread of paper-making technology, which had a similar impact on communication. Paper, a product of China, had been previously confined to the East, but became widespread under Mongol rule. This made written communication much more efficient, leading to the growth of literature, record-keeping, and bureaucracy in the regions the Mongols controlled. The Mongols also played a role in the spread of the printing press, particularly in the Islamic world, where it had a profound influence on the production of books, religious texts, and scientific papers. This circulation of knowledge, facilitated by the Mongols, laid the groundwork for the explosion of intellectual activity in Europe during the Renaissance. Despite the Mongols' role in facilitating the spread of ideas, technologies, and goods, their brutal military campaigns left scars that still remain in the historical consciousness of many nations. The Mongol conquests were marked by massive destruction, with entire cities and populations wiped off the map. In places like Baghdad, Samarkand, and Nishapur, the Mongols employed extreme violence in their efforts to subjugate and control their enemies. The sacking of Baghdad in 1258, in particular, is often seen as one of the darkest moments in world history. The city, once a hub of learning and culture, was destroyed, and its libraries and intellectual treasures were lost. The deaths of countless civilians, including scholars, artisans, and merchants, had a profound impact on the intellectual development of the region. For centuries after the Mongol invasions, much of the Islamic world struggled to recover from the devastation. This violence, while strategically effective, also left a legacy of resentment, particularly in the regions that were hardest hit. However, despite the violence and destruction, the Mongols' legacy was not one of complete devastation. Their reign also brought about the birth of new cities, trade routes, and cultural exchanges. The cities of Samarkand and Bukhara, which were once ravaged during the initial Mongol invasions, would later be revitalized as centers of commerce and culture. Under the Mongols, these cities became bustling trade hubs, where people from all corners of the empire came together to exchange goods and ideas. The Mongols also facilitated the flow of goods from the east to the west, creating an international market for goods like silk, porcelain, and spices. These goods, which were highly prized in the West, helped to establish the foundations of the global trade networks that exist today. Despite the Mongols' eventual decline, their contributions to global trade and cultural exchange are undeniable. The infrastructure they created, the systems of governance they established, and the technologies they spread all laid the groundwork for the interconnected world that would emerge in the centuries to come. The world after the Mongol Empire was not the same as the one that existed before it. The Mongol Empire had reshaped the political, economic, and cultural landscape of Eurasia, and its influence continued to be felt for generations. In many ways, the Mongol Empire was a precursor to the modern world, a world that values the exchange of ideas, the integration of cultures, and the interdependence of nations. The Mongols, despite their military conquest and brutal tactics, contributed to the creation of the globalized world we live in today. While their empire may have been short-lived, the impact of their rule resonates throughout history, a testament to the complexity of empire building and the lasting legacy of the Mongols. The decline of the Mongol Empire, while inevitable given its vast size, internal divisions, and external pressures, did not diminish its lasting influence on the world. The fact that the Mongols were able to establish the largest contiguous empire in history and manage it for nearly 2 centuries speaks volumes about their leadership, military acumen, and ability to adapt to different cultures and challenges. However, the fracture of the empire, especially after the death of Genghis Khan, exposed the fundamental vulnerabilities of such a vast empire. The Mongol Khans had attempted to divide the empire among their heirs, but these divisions led to power struggles, infighting, and a gradual weakening of the unity that had characterized the early Mongol conquests. The Mongol Empire was vast, stretching from the Pacific Ocean in the east to the heart of Europe in the west. It was a patchwork of different regions, each with its own unique political, cultural, and religious characteristics. While the central authority of the Khan remained strong for a time, the sheer size of the empire made it difficult to govern efficiently. The difficulty in managing a diverse empire that spanned such a broad geographical area was compounded by the different languages, traditions, and customs of the various people living under Mongol rule. This fragmentation and decentralization were inevitable, but they also contributed to the eventual fall of the empire. One of the most significant factors that contributed to the weakening of the Mongol Empire was the rising sense of local autonomy. As the empire fractured into separate khanates, each ruled by a descendant of Genghis Khan or a loyalist, regional powers began to emerge. These regional powers were often not as invested in maintaining the unity of the Mongol Empire as they were in securing their own power and wealth. Over time, the loyalty of many Mongol subjects to their khans waned, as they began to prioritize their local identities over their allegiance to the central authority. This fragmentation led to the weakening of Mongol control, particularly in places like China, Russia, and Persia. In China, for example, the Mongol rulers of the Yuan dynasty, despite their initial success in unifying the region, struggled to gain the support of the Chinese people, who viewed the Mongols as foreign invaders. Over time, resentment grew among the local population, culminating in a rebellion that would eventually overthrow the Yuan dynasty and restore native Chinese rule under the Ming dynasty. In Russia, the Golden Horde, one of the four main Mongol khanates, began to lose its grip on the region as local Russian princes gained more power and independence. The rise of Moscow as a political and military power was a key factor in the eventual collapse of Mongol rule in Russia. The Mongols' failure to maintain control over their vast empire was not due to a lack of military strength, but rather to the inability to manage the complex dynamics of regional politics and the growing sense of local identity. Yet, despite the decline of the Mongol Empire and the eventual fragmentation of their territories, the Mongols' influence on global history was far from over. Even after the disintegration of the empire, the legacy of the Mongols lived on in the systems they put in place, the ideas they spread, and the cities they established. The Mongols' contributions to world trade, particularly in reviving the Silk Road and facilitating the exchange of goods, ideas, and technologies between the East and West, cannot be overstated. The Mongols' role in revitalizing the Silk Road helped to create a truly global economy, allowing goods like silk, spices, and precious metals to flow freely across vast distances. The exchange of knowledge, whether through the spread of printing technologies, the introduction of paper, or the transmission of scientific knowledge, so played a crucial role in shaping the world as we know it. These exchanges were not limited to commodities. They were also the catalyst for the spread of new ideas in art, philosophy, and religion, connecting different parts of the world and encouraging cultural synthesis. In this way, the Mongols helped create a more interconnected world, one that set the stage for the later periods of European exploration, scientific discovery, and technological innovation. In addition to their contributions to trade and cultural exchange, the Mongols also left a lasting impact on the regions they ruled through their policies of governance. One of the key features of Mongol rule was their relatively progressive approach to governance compared to many of the empires that preceded them. Genghis Khan, in particular, was known for his meritocratic policies, where individuals rose to positions of power based on their abilities and loyalty rather than their birth or social status. This allowed the Mongols to assemble a highly skilled and loyal group of administrators and military leaders who helped manage the vast territories they controlled. The Mongols were also known for their religious tolerance, allowing people of different faiths, whether Muslims, Christians, Buddhists, or shamanists, to practice their religion without persecution. This open approach to religion fostered an environment of cultural exchange and intellectual curiosity. As scholars from different traditions interacted and shared knowledge, The Mongol system of governance also helped establish important legal frameworks, such as the Yasa, which regulated everything from military strategy to social behavior. These legal systems, though not widely documented, were integral to maintaining order within such a vast and diverse empire. The Mongols' ability to govern diverse territories in a relatively stable manner, despite their brutal conquests, is a testament to their strategic thinking and organizational prowess. The legacy of the Mongol Empire is further evidenced in the rise of new empires that emerged in the wake of their decline. The Ottoman Empire, which dominated much of Eastern Europe, the Middle East, and North Africa, inherited many of the political and military structures that were first established by the Mongols. The Mongols' military strategies, such as the use of highly mobile cavalry units and their innovative siege tactics, were adopted by future empires, including the Ottomans, who perfected many of these techniques. Similarly, the Russian Empire, which arose out of the ashes of Mongol rule, adopted many of the Mongols' centralized administrative practices, helping to shape the structure of Russian governance for centuries. The Mongols' ability to influence other empires, even after their decline, underscores their long-lasting impact on global history. In conclusion, the Mongol Empire may have been short-lived in terms of its territorial unity, but its impact on the world was profound and far-reaching. Through their conquests, the Mongols connected the East and West, revitalized trade routes, and facilitated the exchange of ideas and technologies that would shape the future of the world. The legacy of the Mongols lives on in the political, economic, and cultural systems they left behind, and their contributions to world history continue to be felt to this day. Despite their brutal conquests and eventual decline, the Mongols' role in creating a more interconnected and globalized world cannot be denied. Their empire may have fallen, but the effects of their reign continue to echo throughout history. As the Mongol Empire faded into history, its collapse was far from a simple dissolution. Rather, it was a shifting of the world's power structures, a process that led to the rise of new empires and the reshaping of old ones. In many ways, the eventual decline of the Mongols was an inevitable consequence of their own success. Their vast empire, which spanned from the Pacific Ocean to Eastern Europe, was simply too large and diverse to be effectively governed by a single central authority. The internal divisions, succession struggles, and regional independence movements inevitably led to the weakening of the empire's cohesiveness. However, the fragmentation of the Mongol Empire did not mean the end of its influence. As we've seen throughout the history of empires, even after they fall, their legacy continues to shape the world in profound ways. For the Mongols, their legacy was both the direct result of their unprecedented conquests and the sophisticated systems they put in place to manage their far-reaching empire. The Mongols were not just warriors, they were also administrators, diplomats, and statesmen, and their contributions to governance, trade, and cultural exchange helped lay the foundation for the world we know today. One of the most significant aspects of the Mongol legacy was the Mongol Peace, or Pax Mongolica. While the Mongols were feared for their military prowess and the terror they unleashed upon the cities they conquered, their rule also brought a certain level of stability to the vast regions they controlled. The peace that existed across much of the Mongol Empire allowed for trade to flourish, connecting the East and West in ways that had never been seen before. The reopening of the Silk Road, which had been dormant due to the instability of previous empires, was one of the key achievements of Mongol rule. Under the Mongols, the trade routes between China, Central Asia, the Middle East, and Europe became not only safer but more organized. allowing for an unprecedented flow of goods, technologies, and ideas. The Mongols, despite their destructive campaigns, created an environment in which merchants, scholars, and travelers could move across the empire with relative ease. This facilitated not only the trade of material goods such as silk, spices, and precious metals, but also the exchange of ideas that would have lasting effects on the development of world civilizations. Gunpowder, papermaking, printing, and many other innovations were transmitted from the east to the west, forever altering the course of history. The Mongol Empire, in this sense, acted as a bridge that connected to worlds that had been isolated for centuries at the same time. The Mongols' role in facilitating the exchange of knowledge and culture cannot be overstated. The Mongol Empire, though built through conquest and violence, was also a melting pot of different cultures, religions, and traditions. Under Mongol rule, a vast array of people from the Muslims of Persia and the Christians of the Caucasus to the Buddhists of Central Asia and the shamanists of Mongolia coexisted relatively peacefully. Genghis Khan's policy of religious tolerance allowed various faiths to flourish within the empire, a striking contrast to the religious persecutions of other contemporary empires. This openness to diverse beliefs and practices helped create an environment of intellectual and cultural exchange, where scholars from different regions could come together and share their knowledge. In cities like Baghdad, Samarkand, and Bukhara, intellectuals and scientists worked together to translate works from Greek, Persian, and Arabic into Mongol and other languages, ensuring that valuable knowledge was preserved and disseminated. This intellectual exchange helped to foster advancements in science, medicine, astronomy, and mathematics that would go on to shape the Renaissance in Europe. The Mongols, despite their sometimes brutal methods of conquest, played a crucial role in preserving and transmitting knowledge that would have otherwise been lost to history. As the Mongol Empire fragmented, its legacy was adopted and adapted by the successor states that emerged in its wake. In Russia, for example, the Mongol influence remained strong long after the Mongols were driven out. The Russian Tsars, particularly Ivan III, Ivan the Great, modeled much of their governance after the Mongols. The Mongols' use of a centralized bureaucracy and their methods of extracting tribute from local populations were adopted by the Russian rulers, contributing to the formation of a strong centralized Russian state. In China, the Mongols established the Yuan dynasty, and although their rule was eventually overthrown by the Ming dynasty, their influence remained. The Yuan dynasty's policies of infrastructure development, such as the construction of roads, canals, and bridges, would be carried over by the Ming rulers. The Mongols also helped to solidify the imperial examination system in China, which would play a crucial role in Chinese governance for centuries to come. The political structures and governance models developed by the Mongols were not merely imposed on their conquered peoples. They were absorbed, modified, and built upon by the succeeding empires. Even in the Middle East, where the Mongol invasions had been especially violent, the Mongols left a lasting mark. The Ilkhanate, one of the four main divisions of the Mongol Empire, ruled over Persia and much of the surrounding region for more than a century. The Mongols in the Middle East initially faced stiff resistance, but eventually came to adopt many aspects of Persian culture and governance. The Ilkhanate rulers embraced Islam and Persian customs, blending them with Mongol traditions to create a unique cultural synthesis. The Mongols helped to facilitate the spread of Persian art, literature, and architecture, and their rule contributed to the flourishing of the Islamic Golden Age, particularly in the areas of science, medicine, philosophy. The legacy of Mongol rule in the Middle East is still visible today in the architectural wonders of cities like Samarkand and Baghdad, which remain symbols of the region's intellectual and cultural heritage. Despite the Mongol Empire's eventual collapse, it created a world connected by trade, ideas, and culture was one that would continue to evolve long after its demise. The Mongols played an instrumental role in shaping the trajectory of world history. Through their military conquests, they connected vast and disparate regions, facilitating the exchange of goods, ideas, and technologies. Through their policies of religious tolerance and meritocracy, they created an environment that allowed diverse cultures and religions to flourish. Through their advancements in military strategy, governance, and administration, they set the stage for the development of modern states and global trade networks. Even as their empire fragmented and their rule came to an end, the legacy of the Mongols lived on. The world we live in today, a world defined by globalization, trade, and interconnectedness, is in many ways the product of the Mongol Empire's vast and lasting influence. Though their empire may have fallen, the Mongols' impact on the world endures, proving that even the greatest empires, when they fade, leave behind a legacy that shapes the future. The Mongol Empire's ultimate fragmentation by the 15th century marked the end of an era in history. Yet its enduring legacy continues to reverberate across time. Although the Mongols' once unified empire splintered into regional powers, their influence persisted, shaping not only the territories they conquered, but also the wider global landscape. The Mongols' success in uniting vast regions of the world under one rule, despite the ethnic, cultural, and religious differences between them, is a remarkable feat. The Mongol Empire, by its sheer size and scope, set the stage for a more interconnected world. After the empire fractured, the systems of governance, trade, and communication that the Mongols had established persisted in many regions and continued to influence the political, economic, and cultural systems of both the conquered territories and the successor states that arose in their wake. The most profound of these lasting impacts was the Mongols' role in creating a global trade network. The Silk Road, which had existed for centuries, flourished under the Mongol Empire. The safety and stability provided by the Mongols allowed trade routes to be reopened, and merchants from different regions were able to travel with relative ease across the empire. Goods, ideas, and technologies flowed freely, connecting people from Europe to Asia in ways that had never been done before. One of the key features of Mongol rule was their ability to ensure the protection of these trade routes and provide a level of stability that facilitated commerce. They established a network of relay stations and messenger systems that allowed for swift communication and the safe transport of goods across vast distances. This infrastructure of trade, communication, and transport paved the way for the exchange of both physical commodities and intellectual property. Knowledge, science, and cultural innovations traveled from the east to the west and vice versa, transforming societies on both ends of the trade network. The economic and cultural ties forged under Mongol rule were central to the development of the modern world. The movement of goods, such as silk, spices, and other luxury items, created new markets and reshaped global economies. For example, the Mongols facilitated the introduction of Chinese technologies such as papermaking and printing to the West, which were instrumental in the intellectual and cultural revolutions that followed, including the Renaissance. Gunpowder, another Chinese invention that spread westward during the Mongol period, would change the face of warfare forever. The Mongols were also responsible for spreading advances in astronomy and mathematics, particularly from the Islamic world. Persian scientists and mathematicians made significant contributions that influenced both the East and the West. The scientific knowledge that flowed through the Mongol-controlled territories helped shape the trajectory of global scientific development. However, as with all empires, the Mongol conquests came at a cost. The Mongols were often remembered for their brutal military tactics and the devastating impact they had on many of the regions they invaded. Cities such as Baghdad, Nishapur, and Samarkand were destroyed, and large-scale massacres were common. The Mongols used terror as a psychological weapon, hoping to induce fear and force their enemies into submission. This approach, while effective in many instances, also led to widespread suffering and loss of life. The Mongols' violent methods were particularly evident during their invasions of the Islamic world and Eastern Europe. Baghdad, once a cultural and intellectual center, was sacked in 1258, marking one of the darkest episodes in Islamic history. The destruction of Baghdad's libraries, universities, and scientific institutions is often cited as one of the greatest losses of knowledge in world history. Despite the destruction, the Mongols' impact on the cultural exchange and intellectual progress of the period cannot be overlooked. Though the Mongols were brutal conquerors, they also played a unique role in fostering religious tolerance and cultural exchange. Their policies allowed for the coexistence of different religious groups and cultural traditions within their empire. Genghis Khan himself was a shamanist, but he granted freedom of religion to his subjects, a policy that was extended by his successors. This tolerance allowed people from different regions and faiths, including Muslims, Christians, Buddhists, and Jews, to coexist within the Mongol Empire. In fact, the Mongols often employed individuals based on their skill and abilities rather than their religious background. This practice of meritocracy allowed many different cultures and ideas to flourish under Mongol rule. Additionally, the Mongols themselves were greatly influenced by the cultures they conquered. They adopted many aspects of Persian, Chinese, and Islamic traditions and incorporated them into their own governance, military, and culture. This cultural synthesis helped to establish a unique Mongol identity, which combined elements from various cultures across their empire, even after the empire's collapse. The regions once ruled by the Mongols carried forward elements of Mongol governance, administration, and military strategy. In Russia, the legacy of Mongol rule was felt long after the Golden Horde's power had waned. The Russian princes adopted many of the Mongol military and administrative practices, including the centralization of power and the collection of tribute. These practices helped shape the governance of the Russian state, contributing to the eventual rise of the Russian Empire. In Persia, the Ilkhanate Mongols ruled for over a century and left a lasting mark on the region's culture, architecture, and political structure. The Mongols' influence in Persia is evident in the art, literature, and architecture of the region, which combined Persian, Mongol, and Islamic elements. The Ilkhanate Mongols also played a significant role in the development of Persian literature and poetry, which would go on to influence the broader Islamic world. In China, the Mongols left a lasting imprint through the Yuan dynasty, which was founded by Kublai Khan. The Yuan dynasty introduced a number of reforms to Chinese society, including the development of infrastructure, the promotion of trade, and the creation of a unified currency. Though the Yuan dynasty eventually fell, the Mongol influence on Chinese governance and culture persisted through the succeeding Ming dynasty. The Mongol Empire's ability to adapt and integrate various cultural and political systems is perhaps one of its most significant achievements. In conclusion, the Mongol Empire, though short-lived in terms of its unity, left an indelible mark on world history. The Mongols connected vast regions of the world, facilitated the exchange of goods and ideas, and influenced the development of global trade and intellectual progress. Despite their violent and destructive campaigns, they fostered a level of cultural exchange and intellectual cooperation that laid the groundwork for the interconnected world that would emerge in the following centuries. Their legacy is complex, marked by both destruction and creation, but it is clear that the Mongol Empire played a pivotal role in shaping the course of world history. Their contribution to the development of the modern world cannot be underestimated. Through their conquests, their governance, and their promotion of trade and cultural exchange, the Mongols helped shape the world as we know it today. While the Mongol Empire may have crumbled, its lasting influence continues to be felt across the globe, a testament to the empire's remarkable achievements and its enduring legacy. The fall of the Mongol Empire, although gradual and marked by internal fractures, did not completely erase the seismic impacts of its rule. The empire's brief but intense period of dominance played a pivotal role in shaping the trajectory of the medieval and early modern world. The lasting legacy of the Mongols is often not just about their military conquests, but about the way their rule reshaped civilizations through the connections it fostered across Eurasia. Their empire created the first real global network, linking the East and West in ways that had not been seen before and would not be replicated until the age of modern globalization. When we examine the global connections that began during the Mongol era, we see how they built the foundation for everything, from trade routes to cultural exchanges that would continue to develop long after the empire crumbled. The Mongol era created pathways for not just the exchange of luxury goods, but also for intellectual movements, as they carried knowledge across vast distances. One of the greatest achievements of the Mongols was in their ability to establish a relatively peaceful environment known as the Pax Mongolica, which spanned from the Pacific coast of Asia to Eastern Europe. This period of stability, though it was far from devoid of conflict, provided the context in which commerce could thrive. The Silk Road, long a lifeline for trade between Europe and Asia, was revitalized under Mongol rule, facilitating the transport of goods, including spices, textiles, and other precious commodities, which significantly enriched the economies of both the East and the West. This renewed trade also created a more interconnected global economy that would continue to influence the world long after the Mongols lost their grip on their territories. The Mongols' protection and expansion of these trade routes allowed for the safe passage of goods, but it also helped create the first true global exchange of ideas, culture, and technology. The Mongol Empire was an empire of paradoxes, creating both destruction and creation, bringing devastation to some regions while fostering a new global interconnectedness that laid the groundwork for centuries of cross-cultural exchange. Despite the violent conquest and brutal tactics often associated with Mongol rule, they were remarkable in their ability to integrate various cultures, people, and religions into a complex and relatively functioning empire. Genghis Khan's policy of religious tolerance meant that people of various faiths, whether Christian, Muslim, Buddhist, or even animist, could practice their beliefs without fear of persecution. This tolerance promoted a sense of peace across such a vast and diverse empire, encouraging cooperation between otherwise hostile groups. The Mongol system was fundamentally pragmatic and functional, which allowed them to rule over lands that stretched from China to the edges of Europe, managing an empire of unprecedented size. The Mongol leaders implemented a vast network of intelligence and communication, including a highly effective postal system, which allowed them to administer their empire with a level of coordination and efficiency that most empires before them could not match. Even when the empire split into various khanates, the systems of governance they created and the trade networks they established helped maintain a level of prosperity and influence, even after the Mongols lost control of their former territories. The Ilkhanate in Persia, for example, continued to have a strong impact on the region long after the Mongols were no longer in power. The Ilkhanate rulers, though Mongol in origin, embraced Persian culture, language, and traditions, merging them with Mongol practices. This led to a synthesis that profoundly influenced Persian literature, art, and architecture, many of which remained significant in the Islamic world for centuries. Similarly, the Golden Horde in Russia left behind an enduring legacy in Russia's political and military systems, influencing the rise of the Tsardom of Russia. The Mongols' ability to blend elements from their diverse subjects allowed them to rule effectively and left an imprint that would continue to shape the regions they once ruled. Even the Mongols' cultural and technological contributions, though overshadowed by their military campaigns, had long-lasting impacts on history. Their role in the exchange of technologies cannot be overstated. For example, they played a significant role in transferring innovations such as papermaking and printing from China to the Islamic world and Europe. These technologies were pivotal in fostering the intellectual revolutions that followed, including the Renaissance. Printing and papermaking, in particular, allowed for the dissemination of knowledge across borders, making the written word more accessible and ultimately leading to the spread of literature, science, and philosophy. Gunpowder, another key innovation that spread across Mongol-controlled regions, dramatically changed the nature of warfare, particularly in the West. These inventions, brought together and spread by the Mongols, played a central role in shaping the future of both East and West. Their contribution to the spread of ideas, technology, and knowledge significantly influenced the course of history and set the stage for the technological advances that would define the modern world. However, we cannot ignore the darker aspects of Mongol rule. The sheer brutality of their conquests often overshadows the positive aspects of their reign. Entire cities were wiped off the map, and millions of people lost their lives during Mongol invasions. The sacking of cities such as Baghdad in 1258 and the destruction of Samarkand are still remembered as catastrophic events in the histories of the regions affected. The Mongols' use of terror as a military strategy was designed not only to defeat their enemies, but also to instill fear in any who would dare to resist. This strategy of psychological warfare was highly effective, but it also left lasting scars on the cultural memory of the regions they conquered. For those who lived through it, the Mongols were not just conquerors, they were harbingers of death and destruction. Despite these violent methods, the Mongols' legacy has ultimately been one of complexity, the very same terror that they instilled in their enemies was part of a larger strategy that ultimately contributed to the unprecedented cultural exchanges and economic prosperity that followed. The Mongols, though often remembered for their brutality, also fostered an era of greater cultural and intellectual interaction. The Silk Road was revitalized under their rule, and along with the trade in goods, the exchange of ideas and knowledge flowed freely. This cross-pollination of cultures and innovations would lay the foundation for later developments in science, technology, literature, and art. As the world became more connected under Mongol rule, so too did the seeds of a modern, globalized world begin to take root, though the empire would eventually fragment. The connections they established between civilizations persisted for centuries. The fall of the Mongol Empire was the end of one era, but it marked the beginning of a new phase in world history, one in which the world would continue to grow closer, with the legacy of the Mongols serving as a bridge between East and West, connecting disparate parts of the world in ways that would shape history for generations to come. The Mongol Empire, though it did not last, changed the course of history and set the stage for the interconnected, globalized world we live in today. The legacy of the Mongol Empire, long after its dissolution, remains one of the most fascinating and multifaceted chapters in the history of the world. While the empire may have fallen, the profound transformations it set in motion were far from temporary. The Mongols' influence, though often marked by their brutality and war-driven expansion, helped create the groundwork for the modern world, particularly in how global trade, governance, and cultural exchanges evolved. This transformation was not immediate, nor was it without its challenges and contradictions. The Mongols, despite their aggressive methods of conquest, established a new world order in which long-established trade routes were revived, cultural exchanges flourished, and technologies, philosophies, and religious practices crossed borders more freely than ever before. The empire's largest and most enduring contribution was the facilitation of cross-continental exchanges through the revitalization of the Silk Road. Under Mongol rule, these ancient trade routes, which once linked the Eastern and Western worlds, were secured and expanded. For the first time in history, it was possible to travel relatively safely from Europe to China and back. The Mongols' ability to ensure the security of these trade routes was a direct catalyst for the booming exchange of goods and ideas. Spices, silk, precious metals, and other commodities flowed between East and West, enriching the economies of both, but more importantly, the transmission of ideas and technologies played an equally critical role. Gunpowder, papermaking, printing, and other technologies were passed from the East to Europe, spurring revolutions in both warfare and communication that would shape the Renaissance and beyond. The Mongol Empire, despite its own collapse, thus played a crucial role in making the world more interconnected, and the economic and cultural exchanges they enabled would set the stage for centuries of global interaction. Yet, the Mongols' role in shaping the modern world was not limited to trade or technological transmission. Their policies of governance and cultural integration also left an indelible mark. At the heart of their administrative success was their commitment to meritocracy. Genghis Khan, in particular, demonstrated an exceptional ability to transcend the traditional tribal and familial loyalties that governed much of the known world at the time. Instead of relying solely on his bloodline or noble birth to select leaders, Genghis Khan chose individuals based on their abilities and loyalty. His policy of promoting individuals who demonstrated skill and competence, regardless of their tribal affiliation, not only strengthened his military forces, but also built a more efficient and stable system of governance. This meritocratic system was central to the Mongols' ability to govern an empire of such vast size and diversity, and its influence can still be seen in modern political systems that emphasize ability over aristocracy. Even as the empire fragmented and regional powers began to assert their independence, the structure of governance that the Mongols had introduced meritocracy, legal code, yasa, centralized authority, and a combination of local and imperial rule provided a framework that would influence future empires. For instance, the centralized bureaucracy and taxation system they used would serve as a model for Russia, which inherited these practices from the Mongol-controlled Golden Horde. Similarly, Elements of Mongol governance remained in Persia after the fall of the Ilk, blending with Persian traditions to create a lasting cultural fusion that would influence the region's future rulers. Cultural and intellectual exchange, a hallmark of the Mongol Empire, was also pivotal in shaping the long-term development of the societies they ruled. Though the Mongols were initially feared for their destructive invasions, they quickly adopted the cultural practices and traditions of the regions they conquered. This process of cultural assimilation allowed the Mongols to integrate their rule into the fabric of the societies they governed. In Persia, for instance, Mongol rulers adopted many Persian customs and language, making the Persian courts an integral part of Mongol governance. Similarly, the Mongols introduced Persian art and architecture into China during the Yuan dynasty, blending Mongol and Chinese artistic traditions. The Mongols' open-mindedness towards other cultures and religions also allowed their empire to become a vibrant, multicultural space where different traditions could interact. While the Mongols often used force to assert their control, they also allowed religious freedom and cultural diversity to flourish under their rule. This ability to blend and adapt was one of the key reasons why the Mongol Empire, despite its fall, continues to influence the cultural and political landscapes of the regions it once dominated. However, the Mongols' violent legacy cannot be ignored. The brutality with which they established their empire is a central part of their history, and the destruction of entire cities and cultures remains a dark chapter. In cities like Baghdad, Samarkand, and Nishapur, the Mongols unleashed terror, wiping out not only military resistance but entire civilian populations. Historians continue to debate the extent to which the Mongols' use of terror was a calculated strategy, designed to instill fear and secure quick victories, or whether it was simply the result of the Mongols' ruthless approach to conquest. While these acts of violence were undeniably devastating, the Mongols' success in quickly and decisively defeating their enemies was also what allowed them to establish the empire that would connect distant corners of the world. The sheer scale of the Mongol Empire is a testament to their military prowess and their ability to adapt to different forms of warfare. Yet, this very success, built on conquest and destruction, also left the Mongols with a reputation as harbingers of death, and many of the cities they destroyed would never fully recover. Despite the violence, the Mongols' role in shaping the global exchange of goods, knowledge, and culture cannot be overstated. The rediscovery and expansion of the Silk Road allowed for the movement of people, goods, and ideas, creating a truly globalized network of interaction. This exchange of knowledge, from scientific advancements and agricultural techniques to artistic traditions and religious philosophies, set the stage for the intellectual developments of the Renaissance and the subsequent rise of European exploration and imperialism. The Mongols were instrumental in creating a world in which the exchange of ideas was not limited to local areas but spanned the globe. Even in the wake of their empire's collapse, this interconnectedness would persist and shape the course of history. As the Mongols left behind infrastructure, trade routes, and cultural exchanges that continued to flourish in various forms, the world they helped create would go on to shape the future. Ultimately, the Mongol Empire's legacy is one of profound complexity. Despite its eventual collapse, it was a force that changed the course of history, paving the way for a more interconnected, globalized world. The Mongols, through their brutal conquests, cultural exchanges, and governance, helped lay the foundations for the modern world in ways that are still being felt today. While the Mongols' methods may have been violent and their rule sometimes harsh, they were also visionary leaders who who facilitated the movement of goods, knowledge, and people across vast distances. Their contributions to world history were not limited to their military conquests. They reshaped trade, culture, and governance in ways that continue to influence us today. The Mongols may have faded from power, but their legacy is forever imprinted in the fabric of world history, marking them as one of the most impactful and paradoxical empires in history. End of video. Sweet dreams.